We are back with playing some buy sell hold here for some Dynasty players. Two wide receivers in today's video, starting off with Chris Godwin, who is 28.4 years old, wide receiver 42 according to Keep Trade Cut. I do need to check if that has changed real quick. He's wide receiver 41 now, so he's moving up slightly. Startup ADP is 908 as the wide receiver 41, so a little bit of, or basically the same value there. He's valued as a late first in 2025, an early second in 2024, essentially the 203. You see his points per game there. They have gone down 3 straight years. But Chris Godwin's an interesting one because, again, you wouldn't really expect him to have 1,000 yards. If you just ask, most people, if Chris Godwin had 1,000 yards, I think most people would lean no. He had 1,024, which isn't as impressive as it was when you played 16 games. It's essentially 60 yards a game is what you need to average in a 17 game season. And if you're getting 60 yards and 5 catches in PPR, like it's like barely startable. Half PPR, it's not, again, kind of barely startable in both. The big problem with him is the touchdowns. He's only had 5 over the last 2 years. They're rumored they're going to put him back more in the slot, which I believe it was 2021 and 2. I believe he's playing a lot in the slot. I don't think that's going to help his touchdown numbers, though, because that's kind of the one thing, unless the Buccaneers and Baker Mayfield have like a plus, top 10 in touchdown passes this year. If you're playing in the slot a lot, that's usually like the biggest indicator of you're not going to get a lot of touchdowns. It's like the one thing, touchdowns are unpredictable essentially, but it's kind of the one thing you can kind of look at and have decent success at predicting. So I'll say this, if I'm getting a late first or any first for Godwin, I'm going to take it just because, he could fall off a cliff this year. And he's getting older, he's going to be 29 at the end of the year and stuff like that. I don't think you can get a late first for him though, or I don't think anyone's sending a first for Godwin right now. So in that case, I'm not taking a second round pick for him. Maybe I'll take 2 second round picks for him. But I do think he could have just a really good year, like a top 20 year this year. He had 130 targets last year, a crazy amount of targets. Mike Evans had 136. They basically had the same amount of targets last year, right? So he's still earning targets. He just could not find the end zone for whatever reason. And, the catches did go down a little bit. But if you just kind of look at the numbers here and you say, okay, let's just say Godwin catches 3 more touchdowns, which is not even that much. He moves up quite a bit. He was wide receiver 30 in total points. You give him 18 more points and, he's about wide receiver 22. So, is 3 more touchdowns for Godwin that ridiculous to think of? No. I don't really see other guys, maybe Jayden McMillan kind of takes some from him, but I don't think so in year 1. But overall, I think I'm going to hold him if I can't get a first for him or multiple seconds. I will sell him if I can't get either one of those things. So where are you at, Godwin? I know you're kind of a Godwin fan.
Yeah, I think he is one of those perfect sort of candidates. You can kind of see him at all 3 points, right? I think it is smart to sell if you can get a first and you're not even if you're going to start the rebuild and he's, your wide receiver 5 or something on your team, which is totally possible given his age. I think, just cutting bait, getting out and, I do think he's going to be good this year, and that's why I think he's a solid hold as well. I think he'll be good enough. I think he'll repeat kind of what he's done the last couple of years, hopefully with a little bit of touchdown regression. He's heavily involved in the team. He's obviously, the 1B to Mike Evans. They just play such different roles, so it's kind of hard to say who's the wide receiver 1? Well, I mean, not really, but it's Evans. But I do think that what we saw towards the end of last season is what I'm kind of not necessarily banking on 10, 11, 12 targets per game, but a little bit more than he had a lot of games with, 7 or less. And I think he's going to live more in that 8 to 9 target range. And I think it'll be enough to get it done, honestly. I don't think he has wide receiver 1 upside anymore. Like, we only saw that once, and that was with Jameis Winston going absolutely nuts. So I think he's a solid, like, to low end wide receiver number 2, which you do need those guys on your team for sure. Yeah, I think the buy, sell, and the hold, it's very, very team dependent for sure.
Mm-hmm. See, I think even if you are competing, and again, I think I've mentioned this before, I think we get into this mindset of like, if I'm competing, I can never trade away players that are going to, be wide receiver 2s or whatever. And if I'm rebuilding, I can never acquire older players. And I do think that's not as true because, like, again, you can you get a first for Godwin right now on August 2nd. Even if Godwin's wide receiver 20, you can turn that first and package it and get, like, an even bigger contributor to your team later on in the season. What's interesting with his stats, like his catch percentage, if you look at his catch percentage, basically over 70% from 2019 to 2022, over 75% in 2020 and 2021. And then it would drop to just under 64% in 2023. And that lines up with, I think, his slot play.
Baker.
Like he was playing, maybe Baker too, but I think it's more about his playing in the slot. Like he was playing 60, 66%, 70% in the slot during those years with the 70% catch percentage or higher. And then last year he's down to 33%. So I think you can see very similar, like, again, he keeps the targets, he keeps the yards potentially. But then you see instead of 80 catches, he gets 100 catches. Like I definitely see that. And I see last year kind of production, 2022, which, was wide receiver 20 per game. He still only caught 3 touchdowns. So we're not even talking about if he has 3 more touchdowns or so, right? Which is still another possibility. So you could sneakily get like a top 15 season. And I think at worst, you're getting like a low end wide receiver 2 if Jalen McMillan doesn't step up, or Trey Palmer, or whoever, there's not a big target getter at another position, wide receiver that steps up essentially. So, but I would definitely, like I said before, sell him for any first or 2 seconds, whether I'm competing or not, just to, invest in something where the value is only going to go up, and not as volatile as Godwin. So,
yeah. And I mean, you can kind of see it too. His air yards went up quite a bit last year. Mm-hmm. So that does indicate like they were giving him like, longer passes and everything like that. And, maybe it just wasn't quite in the part of the field that Baker works best at. Maybe Godwin's not great at that. Like we'd have to really like go back and like study it. But yeah, I think you're right about the slot involvement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jayden Reed's the other one that we're talking about. 24.3 years old, keep trade cut wide receiver 31, startup ADPs. The end of the 7th round is wide receiver 36. So you're actually getting a little bit of a discount there. He's essentially worth a late first, 112 or a 2025 late first. You see his numbers there. He was wide receiver 23 last year in points per game. Really good rookie year, like 10 touchdowns, which is kind of unheard of for rookie wide receivers. I'll let you start here. Are you buying, you selling, you holding Jayden Reed for let's just say it's a first that you expect to be late?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny because we did Christian Watson a couple of months ago. I think at this point, at least a month ago. It's been a little while. And he was basically right in this same area, I feel like. And kind of what our conclusion was for him was, I'm not selling him for a second. Similar just to what we just said about Godwin. Like, I'm not selling him for a second, but if I can get a first, like, I'm probably just doing that. Jayden Reed, he is like an interesting one. He has the same problem as a lot of the Packers in general, like where it's, it's kind of a crowded room in general. I think honestly, like if I had to pick between Watson and him, I'm still leaning Watson. Like I'm just gonna bank on health and hopefully his hamstrings are the same size now, and that's gonna like fix everything, you know. But yeah, I don't necessarily believe that Reed is the guy that's gonna be there. Or sorry, he's not the alpha on the team. I don't even know if the team has an alpha, and if they do, I think it is Watson. But again, health. And I think one of the big things about Jayden Reed is he didn't play a lot when Watson was on the field. He was still pretty good in a few different games with Watson there. So it's not necessarily like, like it's not like he's a zero-sum guy like if Watson's there. But he's not going to run a lot in 2 receiver sets unless there's injuries. But I mean, yeah, to do what he did as a rookie and his involvement in the rushing game is also something to be talked about. You know, like they can use him in a lot of different ways. And so I think if I can get a first for him, I think I'm just doing that and just being happy, like just kind of cashing out and staying away from the Packers game in general.
Yeah, very frustrating team to like figure out especially for redraft, even for Dynasty. Like I kind of my mindset with them is like if a time traveler comes back right now and tells me there's a Packers wide receiver that finishes, wide receiver 20 this year. Only one guy in the top 24, and he finishes wide receiver 20. I'm going to put my money on that it's Jayden Reed. But if that same fortune teller, but same time traveler comes back and says same thing, only one guy in the top 24, but he finishes wide receiver 13 or something, I'm going to put my money on Christian Watson. That's kind of how I'm approaching it. It is interesting to note now, Jayden Reed was a rookie last year, but in the Christian Watson basically played from weeks 5 to 13. He was like out there 80% or higher most games. Jayden Reed during that time had 4.8 targets per game in the essentially 9 games that Watson either missed or played less than 50% of the snaps. It's 8 games and he missed, and then another game where he played less than 50%. Jayden Reed had like 6.2 targets per game. So his targets dropped pretty dramatically. From when Watson was out there. Man, what's frustrating about the Packers, I know we're not even talking about, Romeo Doubs. I think Romeo Doubs is going to be out there. Like the team really likes him. I think he does kind of all the dirty work for the team. He's going to potentially have the highest snap percentage on the entire wide receiver core. And so that's going to frustrate everyone because he's going to take one of these guys off the field. Dontavian Wicks is a wild card. Like some people think he's the best wide receiver on this team, which is just another layer to it. They have 2 good pass catching tight ends. They might run the ball a little bit more. Josh Jacobs. I think I'm also going to sell here. It kind of stinks a little bit. Jayden Reed, that is, stinks a little bit of like Jahan Dotson. Jahan Dotson in at the beginning of the 2023 season was a top 20 wide receiver. Got as high as wide receiver 18. And Jahan Dotson right now is wide receiver 57, and this is like Jayden Reed's not quite at that level, which is a little surprising because he had a better year than Dotson did his rookie year, but kind of the same thing, big touchdowns, which is very unusual. Then they kind of, could come out and disappoint and they fall off, to wide receiver 60 or something. Like it is concerning there. So I think I do want to just cash out for any first, not for any second. You're right about the rushing. They started to get him going a little bit. He had 9 carries over a 4-week span, and then he got hurt, and they didn't give him any more carries. That could be a sneaky thing. Maybe he is kind of the Deebo Samuel, and if you get 2-3 carries a game, that means you can survive with only 4 or 5 targets a game. A little bit for fantasy value. So, I think I'm right there with you.
I don't think he's taking I want to say Christian Watson. I was going to say he's not taking Josh Jacobs off the field, though. I mean, not that he has to take him off the field necessarily in order for him to be used in the running game, but just like when Aaron Jones basically came back, like that could also be part of it, like why they weren't really using him in the running game. I don't know. It might have been more out of necessity than anything. They're like, well, we can give it to Jayden Reed or AJ Dillon. It's like, all right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do wonder, like, if we did cut his touchdowns in half, which is not necessarily fair to do, but if we did cut it in half, like, we would be way less excited about him. And again, touchdowns are always the hardest thing to predict. He would have essentially a Josh Downs season. Josh Downs had 68 catches, 771 yards, 2 touchdowns. Jayden Reed, 64 catches, 793 yards, 10 touchdowns. So, we would be way less excited, even if that number was like 6 or 7. I think we would be way less excited because 10. Look at that number, 10. It's double digits. So it's always concerning. The touchdown again. It's kind of why we were excited about Jahan Dotson. Jahan Dotson had, I think, 8 touchdowns his rookie year, 7 touchdowns his rookie year, and he missed 5 games, right? So like we were super excited about that, but I'm not going to hate anyone that doesn't want to sell him for a random, a late first essentially. So I just think I would, as a smart, safe investment.
Yeah, and I think he will, like, even if he does have like kind of a worse year, not necessarily worse, like as in like worse than what he did, but if he doesn't have like that breakout year kind of a thing, I think there's still going to be that Jayden Reed truther in some of your leagues, if not one person in each of them. Mm-hmm. So you might be able to still recoup some of the value. Well, not some, but like some's obvious, but like, yeah, the first could definitely like not be on the table anymore if he has like a worse year. But I don't know. I think with the Packers guys, they're kind of like, they can be a little culty, like as far as like, oh no, like Christian Watson's the dude. I mean, I'm guilty of that too, or Jayden Reed's the dude. Like, I mean, it's just people shooting their shot. So they're not drinking the Kool-Aid necessarily, but I think they are an interesting team in that sense where it's like some guys have their dudes and it's like, oh yeah, definitely this guy or definitely that guy. Like you said, Dontavian Wicks, why not Bo Melton?
I know, right?
And I think it's just because of like the team, like the history, but also, they've just like they were good, and they're all so young, and it's hard to like really like pick apart like who to start. So you gotta plant your flag on somebody, kind of a thing.
Yeah, and one last thing about comparing him to Dotson, I think part of the fall for Dotson as well was like just the situation in Washington. Like we weren't very excited. Now that's changed a little bit with Jayden Daniels, but we weren't excited about Sam Howell. The Commanders in general were never excited about versus the Packers and Jordan Love, a young up and coming offense, like totally different environment around him, which people are more excited about. So maybe the fall won't be as drastic like you're kind of alluding to. So, well, we'll finish up there, and we'll see if we'll come out with more of these. Maybe during the season we'll do some more, but help us get to 500 subscribers. Appreciate you all watching, and we will see you in the next one.